welcome. Thank you for joining us in this online session event as part of the 64th session of the Commission for Social Development. My name is Magdalena Sepúlveda. I'm the director of the United Nations Research Institute for Social Development. Together with our partners, the Government of Chile, IDRC, GRADE, CLACSO, and ELA, along with the Global Alliance for Care, we really thank all the speakers and participants for contributing to this important discussion. Care and support systems are becoming increasingly central to social development, especially in the face of persistent poverty, deep inequalities, and growing care needs. This is reflected in the agenda of the Commission of Social Development, which identified resilient care systems as vital to poverty eradication and dignity, within the broader goal of promoting equitable and inclusive social development policies. Today's conversation built on recent global attention to care governance. At the second Summit for Social Development, together with several of the partners that we have convened this meeting today, we convene a special session in which we discuss transformative governance for care societies. We emphasize care as a fundamental pillar of inclusive social development. Now, we bring this momentum into the discussion of the Commission of Social Development, focusing on poverty eradication, social justice, and dignity. There's also been significant progress in responsibility in identifying the responsibility of actors and states regarding care. And this development has been particularly important in Latin America and the Caribbean. The Tlatelolco Commitment has established care as a structural public policy, while the Advisory Opinion 31 of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights emphasize the responsibility of states to ensure access through effective policies. Today's dialogue aims not just to reaffirm the importance of care, but to explore how it is integrated into poverty eradication and social justice agenda. We will examine the underlying assumptions and the policy implications for coordinated social development strategies. This discussion occurs in a context of renewed challenges and a very, very strong backlash to gender equality, as highlighted in a recent UNRWA and UN Women report that I invite you to look. It is crucial then that care is approached with analytical clarity and policy seriousness, rather than being reduced to more rhetoric. Our session will progress through several key themes: framing the issues, financing constraint, rights-based obligation, evidence and research, and structural dynamics such as climate and inequality and governmental coordination. We will wrap up with key takeaways. And to start, I'm very pleased to introduce Ana Moreno from the Global Alliance for Care. Thank you, Ana, for moderating this session. And before that, I'm going to give the floor to our first speaker, Carolina Bovino from IDRC. Carolina, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. Gracias por la invitación. Muy buenos días a todas y a todos.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Welcome, everybody. It's a pleasure being here with you today and an honor to represent the International Research Center for Social Development, from where, for those who don't know, we take care of financing, research, and this research that is dedicated to action. As part of this conversation is going to be to show you a little bit more about what we do regarding care. This means to support evidence and coalitions that are able to transform the care economies from a perspective on how we value care, how it's governed, different policies, and how this is financed. Understanding this as a structure, a social structure. Currently, we're supporting a $25 program that supports Africa, and we are also investing in Latin America with transformative views to widen the care systems in Latin America with a gender perspective and strengthen learning, training throughout the regions south-south. And we understand this is important and this is not a marginal topic, but a way to accelerate this work. So it is an honor to participate here today that is co-convened by many allies and in this that are working together in this agenda, UNRWA's Claxo, ELA, the Global Alliance for Care, and the government of Chile. Thank you so much for co-convening to this actually conversation and a relevant conversation. They asked me to talk about financing care in the framework of public policies. So I'm going to share with you some reflections on how to finance care and how this means invents in infrastructure towards poverty eradication. My main message is simple. Financing care shouldn't be understood as a complement to public policies for poverty eradication, but care is the key, the source, the founding of this. When care are not financed, poverty is reproduced through the inequality access to the services, the informality, the violence, and the many intergenerational disadvantages that are present. On the other hand, when care are financed, capacities are liberated, decent work, resilience, and the poverty reproduction cycle is broken. I consider that if we talk about care financing, we need to name it as such. And this is a work that we support with Lucia Silmi, the Economy and Care Network. This is a starting point. We cannot say that care are not being financed by anybody. In reality, they are being financed. However, these are financed by women. Women finance care with their time, and of course, this is non-paid work. And every time we have these conversations about finances for those who are not so involved in this agenda, to bring this from the ILO, where they show that the non-paid care work can be revalorized around 9% of the PIB around the world. And also if we include the manufacturing system, the public area combined. And even though if we start going a little bit deeper into this topic, this estimation is very conservative because most of the calculations, they use replacement cost system. So how much would it cost to replace someone that is doing this job? And this value is systematically below what it should be. That precisely when we talk about caregivers, we know that they are not paid fairly. And another methodology is that how much these caregivers could make. So the estimated value will be a lot higher. So I consider this a relevant starting point. Care are being financed, of course, but they are being financed by women. And that's why today's conversation is key so that we can place this at the center, at the funding of the strategies for social development and poverty eradication. And care, as they are functioning today as part of a care society, this will make hundreds of people are outside of the possibility of participate in the labor work, and they are responsible for caring, and of course there is a backlash. So when care are solved privately within the households, they become a key factor for exclusion, social exclusion. So women's participation is reduced, the quality of care that somebody receives depends on the possibilities of the household, and that's why the transgenerational reference is reproduced. And that's another key point that I would like to mention regarding financing. Women are also paying for this subsidy that they do to the care economy, not only with the incomes that they are not receiving. For example, we have this related to the labor participation, but they are also paying this with their own potential. So the social implications for this, and especially the social tentatives for those who are supposed to be doing this, expose them to experience violence, especially regarding gender, or when we talk about domestic activities, for example, where women go to collect water and they have to face violence or home violence, where the social value of a woman is strictly linked to the fulfillment on the domestic work. And when they don't fulfill these activities, this can result in domestic violence. And we can also talk about social inequality. So being able to correct this disproportion is a matter of justice, but it's also a matter of economy and, of course, key so that we can move forward toward a care society. So just to highlight the care as a part of the social structure that is going to be transformative, and it's go beyond the provision of a social service. If we invest in care, what we do is that we redistribute the care work and we take care of life, we sustain life, and we can talk about the care as a key factor to eradicate poverty. And this is key. So we need to discuss how we prioritize this and how we can work together. And now I'm going to talk about a little bit about the financial argument and this idea, try to reposition care not as a expenditure, but as an investment. And the evidence shows that investing in care is generally about a discretionary expenditure. However, in different areas, they are considered investments, even when we have rigorous or explicit information about this kind of investment, including in the employment area. So the first answer that we face when we want to move forward towards investment in public policies, care policies, there is no. And this is when we look at the definition of the care. So I'm going to highlight three main points. First is that every time we need to propose a public policy, it's funny that we demand a higher standard that the financing for different policies. And I think this is when we need to wonder why is this happening, why they are asking for a more clear evidence when we have policies that move on even in a deficit environment. The second axis will be precisely what we have been discussing for a long time, the macroeconomic feminist, is that we can move forward to a fiscal contract that is based in rights, equality, and a concept of shared responsibility. So what this is about taxation, eliminate, so we can strengthen budgeting with a gender perspective, and of course, fight fiscal evasion. And finally, another key concept is that we're not going to solve care financing with one instrument. We need frameworks, financing integrated frameworks that they can recover exemptions so that there is a fiscal expenditure that we can bring back to finance care, that the budgetings can be resignified so that they can support care, and to help the investment so that it helps local infrastructure. And I think here we also need to be cautious with monitoring of the debt, because as we know, the generation of debt for the future, it comes hand in hand with the austerity methods that can have an impact on the care loads. So just to close this part, there is no poverty eradication without care systems, precisely because the care work, the unpaid care work or bad paid, is precisely the critical knot in which poverty is reproduced. Perhaps Lorena is going to talk a little bit deeper about this, but we need to focus a gender perspective in how we invest so that we can recognize and dignify the budgets that are invested in care policies. But I think Lorena is going to talk a little bit more about this. And finally, the last point that I wanted to mention today is how we can connect the care financing agenda with the climate agenda. I think Pablo is going to talk about this link, the care with the climate crisis, but I didn't want to stop and mentioning this because the research we support shows that climate change is also a care crisis. The impact climate change has, the evidence is clear, so that this increases the necessity for care, and it also destroys the very few infrastructure that we may have access to. So what we see is that we have this impact, but financing for climate change rarely or never recognizes or financing care explicitly, because very few times care are classified as adaptation, despite being essential for the capability of adaptation that we have as humanity. A recent article that we supported with the feminist economist explains three pillars for a climate change focus within the perspective, the care as part of the climate important for climate change, and they are key to create resilience. Second, the reparative logic. So the recuperation based on care must be key. And three, inclusive governance. So we talk a lot about how to manage these funds. However, we never see it clearly in the design or in the financing, the participation of the ones who suffer the most with the impacts of climate change, including caregivers. So this doesn't widen exclusively the mandate for climate change, but it corrects a fracture in this design of these finance structures, because this financing for climate change focus on other aspects, but not necessarily on the care areas that are necessary to become more inclusive. But just to summarize, so we can think of a care agenda and an agenda that is to reduce. So we can talk the care agenda as an evidence for poverty eradication. We building strategies for financing care, that this is a little bit of what I tried to do, was a huge agenda. We can share the research and literature so we can recover the taxation, so we can strengthen the fiscal policy with a gender perspective, a financing care as a social infrastructure. And finally, what I was just mentioning, we can incorporate care in climate financing and resilience, because if we finance care, we not only support to those who receive care and the caregivers, but we transform the conditions that persist, make poverty persist, and we promote a collaborative work, and we strengthen the commitments of the social development organization is supporting.
Thank you so much for this first
Thank you so much.
intervention of this panel. Thank you, Magdalena, for inviting the Global Alliance for Care to moderate this incredible panel. The five speakers are well recognized in the ecosystem and also members of the Alliance. I have the terrible job of keeping time. And we wanted to also ensure that the audience was able to at least collect a couple of questions. I'm not so sure if we will be able to do that, but for those that are connected, please write any question, any comment in the chat, even if we are not able to, at the end, use a few minutes to answer them. At least we have, some guidance of what are your feelings when you listen some of the concepts and some of the perspectives of our speakers. So it will be great if everyone can just, keep chatting, even if we don't have so much time, and I apologize for that. So our next, after obviously listening from Carolina about financing, and Magdalena was talking about the five kind of conceptual framework that we have prepared for this panel. I would like, in order to keep time, I would like just directly to pass the floor to Natalia Gerardi, who is the Executive Director of Equipo Latinoamericano de Justicia y Género, ELA, to talk about legislation in this case. And last year was great about financing care system. We had discussions in Seville, Spain, about in the framework of the financing for development conference. But Natalia, it was a milestone for all of you that have been working for years, especially for ELA, that was pushing the advisory, the case of the care as human right in the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. And then in August, we had the advisory opinion published. So I leave you to explain a bit, but it's a pleasure to have you here, and the floor is yours. You have like 8 minutes. Let's try to keep it a bit shorter. Thank you so much.
Muchas gracias. Buenos días, buenas tardes. Thank you so much. Have a good day, good evening. I was prepared to speak in English, and now I maybe change between English and Spanish. Maybe I'll keep to the English so we balance for our international audience. So apologies for not speaking in my mother tongue. ELA is an NGO based in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and we have been working for a long time with the guidance and support of one of our original founding members, Laura Pautasi, and currently our president, in identifying care as central for human development, for the support of life, and central to the sustainability of life and society. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what it implies to identify care and support in the evolution of that concept as central to the sustainability of life and equitable development of societies, which has, as Carolina mentioned, have been very well documented in the recent decades in diverse national and local contexts, because our countries and our societies within our countries are different and involved different challenges, and people in all our diversity and in all the differences of our life circumstances, we know care and support is central, and at the same time, we know there are enormous challenges for the effective realization of care and support. So care and support is key, and at the same time, we also know it is a right. We have a right to care and support. And yet, while care encompasses both paid and unpaid labor, as Carolina mentioned, which includes a wide range of childcare, elder care, domestic work, emotional support, support with persons with disabilities, and even if all of this is crucial to sustain not only ourselves, our families, our communities, and the economies, this labor is systematically excluded from legal protections and economic recognition. To very large extents, it is women, especially women in marginalized groups, who bear most of the weight of this injustice. And not to speak about unpaid caregivers, who are denied access to labor rights, social security, and legal recourse if they wish to access to justice and claim for some of that protection. So paid care workers, who are often informal, migrant, racialized, they face exploitation and abuse. Paid care work is often one of the most informal, unregulated, precarious sectors of the economy globally. The majority of care workers are operating in informal settings. They don't have formal contracts. They lack labor protections. They don't have access to legal aid or social protection. So they are poor in the present, and they will be poor in the future, reinforcing the feminization of poverty that we so well know in our societies. We have very recently witnessed the impact of care to sustain life. We've seen it in the news, no? A young man with disability died because he was denied the care and support of his father, who was incarcerated without legal recourse for alleged immigration reasons. So access to justice and access to care was denied for both of them. As Anna mentioned, the recent decision, advisory opinion of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, which was recently issued during the last semester of last year, which affirms the right to care as an autonomous human right. And this clearly is a landmark achievement for transforming care systems through legislative mechanisms that should encompass a wide range of regulation of societies, not only families, but work, transport, social security, pensions systems. All of that should be encompassed in an integrated system of care. This opinion establishes that states have a duty to guarantee the right to care through public policies that are inclusive, equitable, rights-based. It recognizes the right to provide and to receive care under dignified conditions and to self-care. It obliges the states to implement public policies that recognize care as an autonomous right. And this is crucial, because it means that it is enforceable as a human right and not just a secondary aspect of other rights. This is crucial in the definition of a care system that should include the right of every single person, irrespective of employment, personal or familiar situation, to care in all the three dimensions that were defined by Laura Pautassi back in 2007. The right to care, to receive care, and to have time for self-care. The opinion also recognizes care work in legal and social protection frameworks. It provides for the protection of care workers, especially informal and migrant, from exploitation. It informs states that they should ensure access to justice for caregivers through legal aid, education, and enforcement mechanisms. And it promotes shared responsibility for care, support across genders, ages, and institutions. There was, of course, a political and social and academic road that led to this definition issued by the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. An important part of that road were the commitments reached at the regional conferences of women, starting with the Quito Conference in 2007, and more close in time, the Buenos Aires Commitment in November 2022, and more recently, the Tlatelolco Commitment in August 2025. This advanced in the recognition of care as a right, to care, to be cared, and self-care, and set a decade of action to build a comprehensive, universal, and co-responsible care systems. These documents put together the political consensus reached in the region and through the experience of the Global South, and provide a policy roadmap for governance, for planning, for financing, as Carolina said, and also for cultural change. There's a lot of work to be advanced, not only by governments, who are obviously the primary responsible parties, but also we have an agenda to work from civil society, multilateral organizations, human rights institutions, and even the private sector. A right-based approach to care and support requires information, substantive data, financing, coordination of efforts, and certainly monitoring and evaluation. This is an ongoing conversation, and we look forward to being part of that conversation in CSW and beyond, and especially as we witness the tensions of a growing global momentum for the care and support agenda, but at the same time, a delicate geopolitical reconfiguration with a growing gender backlash and the threat to advance conservative visions that culturally affect the social understanding of care, with narratives that, as we know, promote women's return to the homes. So this is the agenda, this is the challenge, this is the world we are living, and the opportunities that the consultative opinion open, together with the political consensus that led to that decision of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, is an opportunity that we have to seize. We have to work together on that. And I think this kind of conversations and a fora is very important and enriching to move forward in that direction. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Natalia. And thank you also for Coming back again about some things that Magdalena was saying, no, like especially the living role of Latin America, and you have done this guideline even of what has been happening and also what was achieved last year in the Tlatelolco Commitment in the Pan-American Court of Human Rights, but it's coming from a lot of work of decades, especially in the continent. And of course, recognition to Laura Pautasi and Ella Ella's role in all of this that we have been building. But as Magdalena was mentioning, also now how we move forward on not only talking about what, but on how to implement. So I think, as you said, that this panel is giving a lot of hints about how we can move forward together collectively, obviously from the region and the Latin American leading role in the integrated care systems and how to integrate into poverty eradication and social and economic justice, but then how we take advantage of all what has been achieved, especially, as I said, last year. Moving to the next pillar is evidence. And Lorena Alcázar is with us from GRADE, from the Group of the Analysis of Development. Carolina was already, Lorena, introducing you and asking you directly, what are you going to contribute to the from your perspective? Obviously, GRADE is also, has also played an important role in generating policy, relevant evidence on how care systems interact with poverty, inequality, and labor markets in the region. So Lorena, we are looking forward to your perspective on this conversation. Thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Muchas gracias. Good morning and good afternoon with everybody. Thank you very much for the invitation. I am, voy a pasar al español. Me siento muy
I'm going to switch to
honrada,
Spanish. I feel very honored to be here, very happy to participate in this panel, especially with the collaborators that have been working on this topic from a while ago. I have a presentation that I'm going to try to share with you. If it's not possible, I'm going to let it go, but let's try to see. Yes, we can all see it. I can see it perfectly. Go ahead. Okay, apologize. So I've been asked to talk a little bit about the going a little bit deeper in the relationship between poverty and inequality and what is the evidence that we have about the insights from Latin America. Something that have been mentioned before, we have talked about this topic, but I wanted to mention a little bit more deeply in this topic why care matters for poverty and inequality. And this is very relevant in these topics are relevant in themselves, that all the care are part of the economy, the society, the well-being of people. However, it is important that we understand its relation to inequality and poverty so that they can actually become part of a social policy and that governments assume it as such. Usually, we associate, at least in different circles, that inequality is associated to care and that these links are especially associated to women and gender inequality issues because women are the main people in charge of providing care, paid and unpaid care work in American households, especially in Latin America and of course around the world. This situation, as Carolina was mentioning, limits the women's opportunities, their independence and their empowerment, but also generates a lower labor participation. And more importantly, when women are able to work in the different contexts they do they usually work in more informal and precarious job contexts, which means lower lifetime earnings, but also this means that they have no access to social benefits, pension, insurance, and this generates poverty throughout their lives. So what is key here is that inequality that are associated to care are not only related to gender perspective, but they are also related to poverty in different countries. So where care is provided by families, especially women, poverty increases because there is less productivity, especially because we have families that are vulnerable without women that have to work in precarious jobs. They have no access to insurance or pensions. They are vulnerable when we have households, monoparental households, that this is one of the key poverty aspects, is that when we have a monoparental household. So what we can see here is that this poverty risk is not only regarding women, but in household that affects children. And this generates the poverty transmission throughout generations, especially it's more clear when we talk about the most vulnerable groups, when we talk about migrants, especially within our countries, our towns. We can talk about rural, and we also talk about different ethnic groups. And this is where we can identify this context more clearly when we have more inequality and poverty. How these services are provided or how policies are worked out. So these can reproduce poverty instead of improving this context. So we have to pay special attention who and how this care is provided and who have access to this care. So we can end up defining the income poverty, the time poverty. That is also an important, relevant topic and crucial in this case, especially talking about women, and the gender inequality. We have been working thanks to the support of Carolina and the IDRC and the Ford Foundation, and especially with the Global Alliance for Care and UNRIS in developing a project that includes a regional care fund that is called Initiatives to Strengthen Care Policies in Latin America and the Caribbean. In here, we have been able to finance 4 different projects, and we are currently financing 6 in different countries of Latin America and the Caribbean, and always looking to generate evidence that shows how the care policies are associated to these gender inequalities or inequalities in general. And we have found a lot of evidence that the care systems are insufficient, as we already know, because they were not designed taking care of the 5 R's, taking into account the 5 R's of the agenda. So this can end up increasing the inequality. So these impacts are greater in the more vulnerable groups of women, and the care policies and the care systems that are fragmented or bad financed, and many times are very low quality, so they can reproduce the inequalities. However, the most important factor that we can identify is that ignoring caregiver needs, the people who provide care, talking about the paid or unpaid caregivers, or sometimes we can see that they are volunteer, but that they should be paid. This increases vulnerability, inequalities, and poverty. An example of this is a case study in Mexico. So we're not trying to show a diagnosis of this situation. What we are trying to generate is evidence of how to improve this situation. What are the necessary policies, innovatives to improve this situation, to provide care services, so that they don't ignore the caregivers' needs. And one example of this is in Jalisco, in Mexico, in which talking about working with the subnational government and with the support of different actors, a care expansion was expanded and was taken into place, and a lot of attention was put into recognizing the caregiver, the trainers, but also the mothers, but not only mothers, but also grandmothers and different caregivers and the households, and how they pay special attention to give them the support, social protection, training so that their vulnerability could be reduced with important results. In this case, we found different indicators that have to do with the gender norms that are behind all of this and that they require a different kind of job. When we see care as something that has to be involved in the social policy, there are a few limits that we need to work on together collaboratively. In our studies, we found evidence, and they have focused on the central role played by women-led social and community organizations, because when the state doesn't fulfill its role and is not collaborating, all of this lays on the families and the world and the communities. So in some cases, the public support is fragmented or is not sufficient. These organizations play a critical role with interesting results that allow households to become part of the labor and also to share responsibilities. But we also found that there is a limit on the amount of work that communities can perform, because they also need an adequate public support, regulation, and financing, of course. And this is why we work in our studies with the representatives of the public area, working in alliance with researchers and different social organizations, grassroots organizations, so that we can identify the needs. And of course, working always collaboratively is essential. So I highlight that the care policies should not be a topic of rights. I'm not saying it's not, but they should also be part of the social agenda for the social development of our countries. Just briefly, I want to show you here a map of the different case studies that we have, that we're looking at. We have in Dominican Republic, in Mexico, we have 2 in Colombia, in Uruguay, and Peru. And we have, we can talk about care for the elderly, care for people with disabilities, child care. And the other topic that I would like to mention very briefly is that within this context, the backlash context that we're going through right now, we can say that the care agenda has gained a lot of ground after the pandemic. It is still not well established how this can be transformative, taking into account the gender perspective, making sure that inequalities are not reproduced or increased, but reduced. And why is this? Because in many times in this context, it's very complex, and we can talk about expanding services, but of course, developing or offering very precarious jobs for women, or the services that are implemented will many times lay on the communities without the adequate support from the state. Again, falling on women and giving them the responsibility of that. So the care focus should be on the people who receive care, but also on the caregiver's needs. In many cases, we talk about a window of opportunities so that we can work on care agendas with the support of the International Bank or different international organisms. Sometimes we already have access to important investments, so we need to generate evidence. We talk with the public areas and the different actors involved to make sure that we have these perspectives and that inequalities are not reproduced. It is also important to have access to more information, more data, and especially disseminate this information, because many times this already exists, but it's not well spread out. And the real demand, and to pay attention to the supply and demand of care services and the working conditions of the caregivers from many groups that are usually invisible, from which we don't know what their working conditions are, and the gaps are unseen because we are not familiar with the working condition. We need this clarity. It's not necessary to have this rigorous information, very tough information, but we need to know, to have access to this. information. We need to know about learning, the learning experiences. It doesn't need to be like very specific research or data, but evidence on how care policies work and who are the beneficiaries, what works and what doesn't. And also, not to forget that behind all these, we have the gender stereotypes and gender norms. And we have access, for example, to different case studies from different parts of the world on how, other than we know that we shouldn't be working only with women, but also men and households in general, there is a wrong perception on what are the beliefs regarding this topic, that sometimes women believe that men are not willing to collaborate, just to say it in one way. But in reality, women are the ones who believe that they have to carry that responsibility. So we need to work to know what is the real situation and what is the current situation regarding stereotypes, until what point women believe it's still their responsibility to have this workload. So it is also important to know this, because as we know, there is a limit on what we can achieve if we don't work on this area. And just to close my participation, there's a lot of knowledge that we can take out from these case studies, by comparing, by doing applied research collaboratively with the governments and with the civil society, and that this shows a series of conditions that allow us to have better results, innovative care policies that actually reduce poverty and inequality. So coordination is required. It is required to introduce different care rights, of social protection, gender. In most of our countries, this is the most difficult work, to carry out this coordinated work, because sometimes care policies are only seen as a gender perspective topic and they are not included in justice or social policies. And so it's necessary to work jointly. It's necessary. The other learning curve from this is that we need to improve, we need to redistribute, and we need to recognize the caregivers in terms of their own well-being, because we found in many cases that they have a double workload. They need to care of elderly people or people with disabilities, and this ends up affecting the family members, especially the caregivers. So it is important to work taking this into account. And well, public financing is required globally, in a sustainable way, and that is not fragmented. And is important. Families' participation is important. Communities' participation is also important. And of course, the state participation is relevant from the regulatory perspective. So we can achieve social justice and social development. We need to talk about integrated social policies, and we need to pay special attention not to reproduce, but also reduce poverty and gender inequality. Thank you so much, Lorena. I'm just gonna close by showing you, I don't know if this works, but you can contact us. We have a webpage in which you can have access to this
Lorena.
data
Thank
research.
You so much, and for the work that you are doing with the Regional Care Fund, as you said, with other organizations, but we need that evidence definitely to keep pushing the agenda and building on the how and the interconnections and the coordination. I'm going to pass the floor now to Pablo Romero, Executive Director of the Consejo Latinoamericano de Ciencias Sociales, CLACSO. CLACSO also organized last year their Congress, but they have been also working for decades on bringing social justice and structural perspectives into policy debates in the region, and they are really well known. And as Magdalena was saying at the beginning, one of the things that we wanted to discuss was the structural dynamics, in this case, climate injustice. So, Pablo, I would like to give you the floor to bring that perspective, how climate change connects with obviously care inequalities, poverty, social inequalities. So the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Excelente, muchas gracias Magdalena. También voy a compartir presentación. Si me confirman que la están viendo, entiendo que
Thank
sí.
you so much. I'm also going to have a presentation.
No está aún en
We
pantalla
can
completa,
see
no
it
lo presentamos,
now,
pero ahí tú mismo, pero la vemos.
Ahí la coloco.
but we can see it now.
Ahora sí, gracias.
Bueno, gracias a
Okay, thank you so much for thank you to all of you for this invitation. Of course, it's always a pleasure to share this panel with different organizations with which we have been working jointly in these issues. Of course, UNRIS, IDRC, of course, greetings to Ella, with whom we have come together and to work in very different linked projects regarding care and taking into account care as our key right. Also, greetings to our colleagues from GRADE, with whom we have shared different spaces, and of course to the government of Chile. Thank you so much for this invitation. And in my condition of Executive Director of CLACSO, the Latin American Council of Social Sciences, I'm doing it in Spanish. And of course, we talk about the social sciences and arts. I consider important to be able to share this presentation with you. Well, this presentation is entitled is something that we talk about, and also greetings to Magdalena Sepulveda, but also to Noni, with whom we have been talking about this presentation. The title is Care, Climate and Social Justice, Academic Perspective from Latin America and the Caribbean. On the one hand, it's important that we situate ourselves, and of course, I share the excellent presentations that came before me. It is a great responsibility to talk after these presentations. On the one hand, the climate crisis reproduces and deepens inequalities that already exist, but they also configure future inequalities, the ones that, thanks to the climate crisis, produce. The second is that the impacts of these can be differentiated in three areas that are gender, ethnics, and territories. And these constitute different strategic challenges for research, advocacy, and public policies. And finally, is that we can think about the crisis, but on the side of the transitions, talking about social justice, and that it was also mentioned in the other presentation. This is an opportunity to challenge models, to widen the boundaries, and to open possibilities for new considerations, new public policies, and also to be more familiarized with different contexts, as as our colleague from GRADE was mentioning. And being familiar with these different challenges give us a new perspective to be able to propose different strategies, to look for possibilities and to widen these limits, especially situated in Latin America and the Caribbean, from the global south, but with a regional perspective. Structural inequalities and multidimensional as well persistent. And this has been mentioned as well, that despite there have been some improvements, inequalities saying this look persists, there is also a proliferation of extractive economies that potentialize the vulnerability and the climate crisis. And there is also a recent pressure and an ongoing pressure that has been put in the care system since the pandemic, but of course it started earlier. And this also provokes the widening of the inequalities and evidence, of course, on how climate crisis deepen the load on the caregivers, which are mostly women. So when we talk about this is a synthesis of the different research developed in Claxo. Some have been developed along with the Global Alliance and UN Women, and we have currently developing different ones. And of course, we are working with Carolina in this project we started a few months ago. So these research that are linked with the working groups that exist in Claxo, and they talk about these topics that are how they interlink with care, climate, and social inequalities. So this interjection, which we consider a key topic to study. Of course, we can also talk about the relations among power, gender, work, and territory, the need to use multi-actoral, integrated, and transversal focus or approaches, the dialogues between research and knowledge management with public policies and different civil society organizations, the production of data situated with social advocacy, and of course, taking into account the communitary knowledge, the grassroots knowledge, and how we can join this ancestral knowledge with the social innovation from the territories for the sustainability of life. And of course, how we can articulate all of this with the care economies and the concept of the well-being, and how we can talk about the interdependency, not only about human beings and nature, but also about human beings and the environment that develops correlated ethics and recognition that challenge the dominant paradigms of development and progress. So what is the place of Claxo in this research? So this has to do with the production of research situated based on the local and regional evidence, the articulation of dialogues between the academia and politics and also the civil society. We also promote the creation of strategic alliances and multi-actorals for advocacy, always talking about open sciences, public with gender perspective, with intersectional diversity, and always seeing it from a gender justice perspective. The two experiences that I wanted to share with you today, one has to do with research project that we developed along with UN Women that is called Environment and Feminism, the roadmap of organizations of grassroots women organizations pro-environment and well-being. And these recognize four research teams that you can see here that are linked with this notion of ecofeminisms and with the defense or the life and the territories, thinking of promoting the dialogue between women, the environment from a community perspective, thinking also about these practices of the collective, feminist collective that emerge, and an approximation of knowledge construction, starting from how this collective, how this group of women work within the territories, So these were mixed groups of research and also different social activists participate within the territory. And of course, with the gender perspective and care perspective as a transversal point. And this resulted in a book. You can have access here with the QR code. In case you would like to download it, I could also copy the link in the chat where you're going to be able to get to know the results of the research that I just mentioned. And the second experience that I wanted to share with you is one that we are developing right now with the IDRC. And that has to do precisely with the research on the nexus between climate and care, taking as a starting point a regional platform for social dialogue and policy innovation in Latin America. This is a joint work that we are developing along with the Global Alliance for Care and the International Development Research Center, and of course, using their dynamics as networks, Claxo and Trenzando Cuidados, and with the Global Alliance for Care, with the support of the IDRC. And let's just say that the innovation has to do with research articulated between two topics that so far they are seen in a separate way. Something that has to do with the climate change and care systems and advocacy within this area. And let's just say that we can talk about the social and gender dimension of the current climate crisis, and on the other hand, to be able to understand how these dynamics, the care and the climate impact dynamics, mix or interlink. Obviously, with a gender perspective, always, it has to do with the co-production of knowledge and capacity building that recognize the power of the social activism and the public policies within 5 countries. In Latin America, Uruguay, Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, and Honduras, we try to develop advocacy in different making decision processes at the local, national, regional, global, multilateral environments. And we develop a roadmap to produce advocacy in mitigation policies as well as climate change adaptation policies, and also identifying possibilities to increase financing for the development of these initiatives. And of course, this is key to sustain the public policies and research, and of course, the advocacy actions. And just to close a little bit, I know that I have very little time. Some notions to continue working jointly. Investing in care is also investing in climate resilience. This is key based on the evidence and research in which there is no inequality reduction without strengthening care systems unless they fight in social inequalities that exist. One research that places life at the center as a decision of informed public policies and based on evidence, and the contribution to the construction of equalitarian societies, fair societies, and starting from the recognition of the care systems and the gender perspective as key aspect to solve. And I will end up here just to take into account the time. Thank you so much.
Time for dialogue, but we were thinking about that, but it was great presentation. Thank you so much. It's great always to listen from the concrete, and it was Lorena and then you, and it's really interesting everything that is going on. So thank you so much. And then the final speaker, and probably from my point of view, one of the most important ones because it's showing the policy practice and is the Minister of Social Development and Family from the government of Chile, Javier Toro. And Chile has been a leading government in the last years in how to put in practice a coordinated care center policy at the national level, at the local level. So, Minister, the floor is yours. We are really pleased that you are here with us and you are closing the panel before the closing remarks from Magdalena. So please, Minister. Thank you. Muchísimas gracias, Ministra.
Muchas gracias. Gracias por la
Thank you
oportunidad
so
también
much. Thank you so much for the opportunity
con un tema
to be here
tanta
today and talk to
relevancia
you
en
with a
contexto
relevant,
global,
extremely relevant topic in the global context,
evento
but also in the context of this event that is given as part of the session of the Commission for Social Development of the UN. And this is the first session that we have after the global summit that we had last year. And this commission, the context of this Commission for Social Development is, besides the institution that has the duty of giving a follow-up to the commitment established by the state members in Qatar. That's why it was very interesting and important for us how these discussions are taking place and how we can contribute to them as well, especially in this very moving context. Of course, as we can see, our world is changing so fast and social rights are threatened, talking about how we can, the questioning to the role of the state and the multilateral areas as we know them. And well, in this context, it's not good enough that we stay or we talk about in a blind defense or the social development. So we need to start to recognize our limitations, and as we know that they have proven to be not enough to cover the demand, and how these are related to the legitimacy. And we cannot only talk about a conservative defense of the system that haven't provided all the well-being that we will probably hope. So this implies that we need to rethink the economy, we need to rethink the institutions and the communities from a new perspective that has to see the sustainability of life at the center, as you were mentioning before, and the relationship that Pablo was mentioning about environment, the well-being. Undoubtedly, this is part of a wider reflection that we need to develop in our own development, and care is at the center of this transformation. The good news is that in the past few years, a consensus has been achieved around the world about our society, and of course, we are discussing these from decades, the feminists from the academia, also in international conferences. Today is a very unique point in terms of how we are discussing this within our own countries, in the public sphere, and undoubtedly at an international level, and the recognition of care as a human right, and the consultative opinion of the Inter-American Human Rights that Natalia was mentioning is an important step in that sense. The Tlatelolco Commitment that reaffirms that care is a key structural policy and has social responsibility, and the political declaration of Doha that expresses that the care and support systems have a multiplying effect to participate, generate a high investment in taxation from the states. Those are three instruments from the states that are proof that this conviction has been extended, that the states have to prioritize care policies due to the positive effects that they represent towards the different challenges that we face, such as the persistent poverty and inequality and the social injustice. We have evidence that all, like the one that we have seen today, regarding the care system as a key engine to support the human development, and that is also key to expand the decent work, to reduce poverty, to close gender gaps, and to support the community, which are key elements for these social protection systems. The ILO has provided a system that's increasing different social systems. We could 300 more jobs for decent jobs could also contribute to the decrease the lower rate of for women. So undoubtedly, investing in care systems is a strategic investment for the social and fair development. And today we can talk about this is a good, very good news, and undoubtedly this moment contributes to this. However, this clashes with a reality that in local policies in the social agenda sometimes, especially in our region, have been framed, strongly framed with a subsidy. And in the middle of very huge changes, different factors that affect poverty, the focalization of social systems needs to look to different areas and different systems that reduce social injustice, gender inequality, and that promote access to training and the support through social services. And this here is where we can talk about a reality. There is a need for care to sustain life at a global level, but every region, every country has its own reality where all of this falls. And that's why we talk about the different features of Latin America and the Caribbean, because we can talk about different social protection systems that have been subsidized. But we can talk about an institutional architecture in which this challenge adopts. And now I have the experience of the government that is not only about how to increase and how we can provide more resources to an institution that is designed to do something else. So a challenge in this end is very big. And this is where care systems appear as a necessary need, so that these are systems help to reduce poverty and to continue working toward a care economy. And many different endpoints, purposes that we have shared in different governments and the civil society. We can say that if care policies already existed, very isolated, it's not that they have been doing in the last 4 years, but generally they were characterized by fragmentation, and that doesn't contribute to the transversality that is necessary for care. And that's why the decision makers need to understand the financing and care policies for children, for the different communities, not only because this reduces inequality, but we can see as the value this has and to generate innovation, because the sustaining of life depends on care. So our challenge is to understand that this is strongly related to productivity and well-being. When a mother has to leave her home because she doesn't have access to childcare services, that is something very recurrent in Chile, for example. Local talent is lost. Every hour of unpaid work, it reduces the economical growth potential, and this deepens work gaps and society gaps. But for us who work in implementation of public policies, we face a common problem. And of course, this is the limitations of the national budgets. And this is a reality that we don't have illimitated financing, and we cannot start a competition between vulnerability and limitations. If we talk about social responsibility, we cannot talk about we need more resources and we need more resources. So we start a competition with different areas and all the different social spheres that need this financing as well. So we have to go beyond this. We have to think of a better way to redistribute this financing, but also how to generate more welfare and how we can take advantage more of this. The modern participation, innovative participation, we need to generate more generation of data or research, taking advantage of the knowledge from different countries, talking about the participation of the public and private spheres to create institutions that can tackle this uncertainty. This is not a problem for others to worry about this, but it is up to us to talk and to tackle these issues. And by taking these ideas and to put it in paper, the planning allow to identify the vulnerabilities in every region, every territory, to be able to know who has problems with connectivity, who has access to better basic services, where care demand is higher, and that's how we can develop better public policies and that we can reduce poverty so we can reach communities or people who have not been able to receive or have access to this, and making use of the evidence and research and put all this information into action. We have access to different tools and information that we can better use. And this context is something that we are living in our region. This is a structural change that has been taking place in Latin America and the Caribbean, leaving behind the focalization of the social services and moving forward to a universality of the social protection. Especially in Chile, we understand that care has to be the fourth pillar along with education, social security, in that level, and that prioritization of the care policies and by redefining the social development was not precisely a result of different congresses, or this is more related to how poverty influences in our societies nowadays and how important this is. Not a month ago, the national policy of care was approved just a month ago. And after many years of struggling and fighting towards this and fighting for the different grassroots organizations that have been working toward pushing this agenda, today, Chile recognizes at a legal level the right to care in all its dimensions with the standard established by the Inter-American Human Rights Court. And we are funding the public spending, the strategic planning, and so we can talk about the co-responsibility, especially referring to social and gender co-responsibility, so we can work towards this. And in my case, this is the last week if fulfilling my job. There is a change in administration coming soon, so nowadays we can say that with the approval of this law, the care system as a key part of the social protection is not an initiative from this government. It becomes a state policy and is going to have to be implemented by the next governments in a process that I have no doubt that is going to face many challenges due to all the different transformations that we are facing. But at least we can establish that we can leave behind a framework, a legal framework that allows to move on to the next stage in this process that never ends, but that nowadays it is, we can say that has been strengthened, and this is where we reframe the importance of the civil society, the international organizations, the importance of your role to keep working and promoting this work. And just to conclude, I would like to reinforce the idea that the care should be one of our main concerns when we talk about a different model of development to strengthen the care system, care and support system. It's necessary to promote equality and social justice, and this is a key, since these are the key aspects to fight poverty and reduce poverty.
And I was supposed to have some takeaways, but time is over. And to be honest, Minister, you have already done all that, summary, in fact, and even putting into practice. So for me, it's a great panel in the framework of the Commission of Social Development to keep advancing, as Magdalena was saying, not only rhetorically, but ensuring that, we embed care in poverty eradication and social justice as a transformative vision, as a political transformation. If we build care systems on an injustice, unjust structure, we keep that injustice. So I will not try to do those takeaways. I think it has been just great, and I will pass the floor to Magdalena Sepulveda because we are just more than 7 minutes late. So Magdalena, over to you, and thank you so much.
It has been a very, very rich discussion, and we're already over time. So let me finalize with very, very very short words. Vivimos tiempos convulsos. Tenemos amenazas a las democracias. Nuestro
We are
espacio
living
cívico
a
se
very
está,
complex context. We are facing threats. Our space is being reduced, and we have a climate emergency that could be irreversible. Within this context, talking about care issues could sound as something secondary. However, as has been shown in the discussion today, the inequality distribution of care and the lack of support through infrastructure and public services and social protection has to be at the center of the inequality topics and social development. Therefore, especially in our region in which political changes have been placed, the care agenda and the care policies are changing. So the duty falls on the civil societies and academia to continue pushing forward so that these topics are part of the agenda. We have the evidence. All the institutions that have been participating in this event are proof of that. The UNRIS has been working on this for decades. We have a very wide evidence and data that is now available for you to have access to. And we will continue working and promoting work within the region so that we can translate the state responsibility to public policies that improve the sustainability of life. Thank you so much for your participation. And with this, we close today's session.